The glass door of First Light Bank swung open, and I barely glanced up from my phone. Another one. They always came at closing time, thinking we'd be softer when we were tired. The man shuffled in, bare feet leaving damp prints on our polished marble floor. His white robe stained and torn at the hem. His beard was wild, his eyes too bright. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we're closing in 5... Jessica, our newest teller, started to say, her voice tight with the nervousness we all felt around. "People like him." But he just smiled, walked right past her, straight toward my desk. I stood up, positioning myself between him and the executive officers. Security protocol. "Sir, you need to leave. We can't help you here." "Can't you?" His voice was soft, almost musical. He stopped 3 feet away, and I caught the smell, not the expected stench of the street, but something else. Incense. Rain. "I just need you to check something for me." "This isn't a public service," I said, louder now, making sure everyone could hear, making sure they knew I was handling it. "There's a shelter 2 blocks. Your balance." He tilted his head, still smiling. "I'd like you to check your balance." My stomach dropped. How did he know my name? I'd taken off my nameplate hours ago. "Marcus!" The voice cut through the tension like a knife. I turned to see Pastor David emerge from the elevator, his expensive suit still crisp despite the late hour. He'd been meeting with our CEO about the building fund. His eyes locked onto mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Don't do that. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from, and write your opinion. Who was right in this scene and why?" Marcus Chen thought he was just protecting his bank when he refused to help a homeless man in a white robe, without knowing that this encounter would expose secrets that could destroy everything he'd built. What happens next will shatter every assumption about wealth, faith, and divine judgment, and will reveal a truth so devastating that it changes not just one life, but an entire community. A story that will make you question what truly matters in God's eyes and will leave you breathless until the very last word. I'd been with First Light Bank for 12 years, started as a junior analyst, clawed my way up to senior VP of private banking. My office had a view of the city skyline. My parking spot had my name on it. My suits cost more than most people made in a month. And every Sunday, I sat in the 3rd row at Mercy Hill Church, where Pastor David preached about prosperity gospel and divine favor to 5,000 congregants. I was living proof that God blessed those who worked hard. The white-robed man took another step forward. Pastor David's hand shot out, gripping my shoulder. "Marcus," I said, "don't." "Pastor, this is bank security. I know what it is." His fingers dug in harder than necessary. "I also know who you are." He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the homeless man with something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. "Sir, I apologize for any inconvenience. Marcus will help you." "Won't you, Marcus?" The words felt like they were being spoken by someone else, by someone whose career wasn't on the line. But Pastor David was on the board of directors. Pastor David had recommended me for this position. Pastor David's endorsement had opened doors that my MBA never and could. "Of course," I heard myself say. "What do you need?" The man's smile widened. He pulled something from beneath his robe. Not a weapon, thank God, but a smartphone. Cracked screen, cheap case, the kind you bought at gas stations. "Just check your balance. Show me on your screen. I want to see it." Jessica had backed away to her station, pretending to organize papers, but watching everything. 2 other tellers had stopped closing their drawers. The security guard, Trevor, had his hand near his radio. That's irregular," I said carefully. "I can't just show client information to..." "He's not asking for client information." Pastor David's voice had taken on that pulpit quality, that tone that made people write checks for thousands of dollars. "He's asking you to show him your own account, your personal balance. Surely that's not against protocol." My mouth went dry. "Pastor, I don't think..." "Show him," What choice did I have? I pulled out my phone, opened the First Light mobile app, navigated to my accounts. My checking showed $47,229. Savings showed $293,147. My investment portfolio, linked but managed separately, showed $1.8 million, numbers I'd worked 12 years to accumulate, numbers that proved God's favor. I turned the screen toward him, keeping it angled so only he could see. The man's smile didn't fade, but something in his eyes did. Something bright and warm went cold. He looked at the screen for a long moment. Then his gaze traveled up to meet mine. "Thank you," he said softly. "That's all I needed to see." "Great. So if you don't mind..." I started to gesture toward the door, but he was already turning away. Those bare feet padded back across the marble, leaving their damp trail. The glass door swung shut behind him. Through it, I watched him disappear into the evening crowd on 5th Street. Pastor David's hand finally released my shoulder. "You need to be more careful, Marcus." "Careful? Of what?" "That was just some... Was it?" He fixed me with a look that made me feel 12 years old and caught cheating on a test. "Go home, rest. We'll talk Sunday." He left without another word. The elevator doors closed on his troubled expression. Jessica started closing her drawer again, but her hands were shaking. Trevor was typing something into his incident report. Everything felt wrong, like the air pressure had changed and my ears hadn't popped yet. I stayed late, finishing paperwork that didn't need finishing, checking security footage that showed exactly what I expected. A homeless man entering, talking, leaving. Nothing supernatural, nothing that explained the ice forming in my gut. My penthouse apartment in the Diamond Tower felt too quiet that night. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, each light a person, a life, a story. How many of them were checking their balances right now? How many felt the weight of those numbers the way I suddenly did? I opened my banking app again, scrolled through recent transactions. Mortgage payment $8,400, car payment $1,200, personal trainer $500, country club membership $800, dinner at Marcello's $340, wine delivery $290, charity donation to Mercy Hill Church $500. Last month and the month before and the month before that, same amount, same date, automatic withdrawal. 10%? No, not even close. More like 2% of my take-home, the minimum required to maintain my position. On the church's Platinum Partners list, which came with reserved seating and private prayer sessions with Pastor David. The minimum required to look generous. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Matthew 6:24. I didn't need to look it up. 12 years of church attendance had drilled the major verses into my memory. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both. God and money, who is this? I typed back. No response. I set the phone down, but it buzzed again immediately. Another unknown number. Luke 12:48. My hands were shaking now. I knew this one too. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Stop, I typed to both numbers. This isn't funny. A third message appeared. A third unknown number. Come to the shelter. The one you almost mentioned. Come tonight. I should have ignored it. Should have blocked the numbers, poured myself 3 fingers of scotch, and gone to bed. Should have trusted my first instinct that this was some elaborate scam, some scheme to rob me or blackmail me or whatever homeless people did in this city. But Pastor David's fear, that look in his eyes, I grabbed my keys. The city mission shelter was a squat brick building on 9th Street, sandwiched between a laundromat and a boarded-up convenience store. I'd driven past it 1,000 times without really seeing it. Now, standing in front of its chipped green door, I couldn't understand how I'd ever missed it. Inside, the smell hit me first. Unwashed bodies, industrial cleaner, boiled vegetables, desperation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Folding tables were set up in rows, most of them empty now at 9 p.m. A few people lingered, an old woman muttering to herself, two men playing cards with a deck held together by rubber bands, a young mother trying to settle 3 kids on a bench too small for them all. Help you? A woman emerged from what looked like a kitchen, late 50s, grey hair pulled back, wearing a City Mission volunteer t-shirt that had seen better days. Her name tag said, Helen. I'm looking for someone. A man in a white robe, barefoot, beard, Marcus Chen. She said it like she'd been expecting me. He said you'd come. Follow me. She led me through the main room, past a hallway lined with what must have been sleeping quarters, through a door marked private, and into a small office. Files stacked everywhere, a desk covered in paperwork, a single window looking out onto an alley where dumpsters overflowed with trash. The man sat behind the desk, still wearing the white robe, but it was cleaner now. Or maybe it had never been dirty at all. Maybe I'd just assumed. Sit. He gestured to a folding chair. I sat. Helen closed the door behind me but didn't leave. She leaned against it, arms crossed, watching. Who are you? I asked. Someone who asked you to check your balance. He pulled out that cracked smartphone again. You showed me, now I'll show you. He turned the screen toward me. It displayed a spreadsheet, my name at the top, and below it columns, dates, descriptions, amounts. My stomach turned to ice, every transaction from my account, not just the recent ones. All of them, 12 years worth. But there was a third column I'd never seen in any banking. App, a column labeled Purpose, $340, Marcello's restaurant. Purpose, impress potential client, appearance of success, $8,400. Mortgage payment. Purpose, status, elevation above others, security in material possession, $500. Mercy Hill Church. Purpose, maintain social standing, appear generous, secure pastoral favor, 1-200. Car payment, BMW 7 Series. Purpose, display wealth, separate self from those of lesser means. Line after line after line, every dollar I'd spent, every investment I'd made, tagged with the truth of why I'd done it. And none of them, not a single one, said anything about love or compassion or actual faith or helping another human being without expecting something in return. This is impossible, I whispered. This can't be real, can't it? He set the phone down. You asked me who I am. I'm someone who sees balances, not the kind your bank tracks. The other kind, the kind that actually matters. You're insane. This is, Helen, what is? This? Some kind of scam. But Helen wasn't smiling. Marcus, do you remember me? I looked at her, really looked. Something in her eyes, something in the shape of her face. Familiar but impossible to place. I used to work at First Light, she said quietly. 23 years. I was head teller when you were hired. I trained you for your first 3 months. The memory surfaced like a drowning man breaching water. Helen Morrison. She'd been patient with me, kind, had covered for me when I'd made mistakes, and then one day she'd just been gone. You disappeared, I said. They said you retired. They said I retired. Her laugh was bitter. I was fired, Marcus. I took $200 from the petty cash to pay for my daughter's insulin. She's diabetic. I was going to pay it back the next week, but they found out first. And your boss, your precious mentor, Mr. Harrison, he prosecuted me, put me in jail for 6 months for theft, cost me my pension, my reputation, everything. I didn't know, I breathed. You didn't ask. None of you did. I was just gone. Easier that way, wasn't it? Easier to forget that people like me existed. She pushed off from the door, came to stand beside the desk. When I got out, I had nothing. This shelter took me in, fed me, gave me a place to sleep, and now I work here, helping people like I used to be. People you don't see. The man in the white robe tapped the phone screen. 12 years, Marcus. You've earned $1.9 million in salary alone. Bonuses and investments bring it to just over $3 million total. You've donated $72,000 to Mercy Hill Church. That's 2.4%. You've spent $230,000 on cars, $470,000 on housing beyond basic need, $85,000 on luxury goods and experiences. You've given $0 to homeless shelters, $0 to food banks, $0 to anyone who couldn't elevate your status or make you feel good about yourself. I work hard for my money, I said, but the words felt hollow. I deserve. What do you deserve? Marcus? His voice wasn't angry. That was worse somehow. It was just sad. You asked me to check your balance. I did. And what I see is someone who's spiritually bankrupt while being materially wealthy. Someone who sits in the third row at church every Sunday, singing about grace he's never shown, worshipping a God whose commands about caring for the poor he ignores. Pastor David preaches that wealth is a blessing, I shot back, that God rewards the faithful. Does he? The man stood. In the small office, he seemed taller than he had in the bank. The white robe didn't look tattered anymore. It looked purposeful. And what does Pastor David drive, Marcus? A Mercedes. But that's... What does he live in? A house in Westmont Estates, but what do you think his balance shows? The real one? I couldn't answer. Come with me, he said. There's something you need to see. What Marcus didn't know was that Pastor David was, at that exact moment, sitting in his home office, staring at his own phone screen, at messages from the same unknown numbers, at the same verses, at the same invitation to the shelter, and Pastor David was afraid. The man led me back through the shelter's main room. More people had arrived, the night crowd seeking beds before they filled up. An old man with a cane, a woman with track marks on her arms, a teenager who couldn't have been more than 17, carrying everything he owned in a trash bag. You see that boy? The man gestured. His name is Daniel. His father kicked him out 6 months ago for being gay. He's been on the streets ever since. He came to Mercy Hill Church 3 times asking for help. Security turned him away each time because he didn't meet the dress code. The words hit like physical blows. I remembered. I'd been there one of those times, walking in for the midweek service, and I'd seen Trevor, the same Trevor who worked at the bank, escorting a kid out. I hadn't thought twice about it. That woman, the man continued, her name is Maria. She worked 3 jobs until a car accident destroyed her back. No insurance. The hospital bills bankrupted her. She lost her apartment. She tried to join one of Mercy Hill's care groups, but they told her she needed to get her life together first, before she could participate. I didn't make those rules, I said weakly. No, but you benefit from them. You benefit from a church that keeps people like Daniel and Maria out. So people, like you can feel comfortable, safe, righteous. We stopped in front of the young mother I'd seen earlier. Her 3 kids were asleep now, 2 on the bench and 1 in her arms. She couldn't have been more than 30, but she looked 50. This is Sarah, the man said softly. Her husband died 2 years ago. She's working as a waitress, but rent keeps going up. Last month she had to choose between paying for their apartment and feeding her kids. She chose food. They've been here for 3 weeks. Sarah looked up at me with exhausted eyes. Do I know you? I don't think so, I started to say. Yes, you do, the man interrupted. Sarah waited on you last Tuesday at Harvest Restaurant. You left a $20 tip on a $340 bill, less than 6%. She smiled and thanked you anyway because she needed that job. The memory hit me. Lunch with a client. I'd been annoyed because the service was slow, because Sarah had mixed up our drinks, because I'd thought she seemed distracted. I'd considered leaving nothing at all. I was doing my best, Sarah said quietly. My sister was watching the kids, but she had to leave early, and I was worried about getting back in time, and She stopped, swallowed. I'm sorry if I disappointed you. No, I choked out. No, Sarah, But she'd already looked away, already dismissed me as just another wealthy customer who'd never see her as human. Helen appeared at my elbow. There are 60 people staying here. Tonight, capacity is 40. We had to turn away 15 families today because we don't have space or funding. Your church just completed a $4 million renovation to add a coffee bar and a bookstore in the lobby. When we asked Pastor David for support last year, he said Mercy Hill's resources were committed to growing the congregation. I didn't know about that request. You didn't ask, she said again. That's the problem, Marcus. You don't ask, you don't see. You just live in your bubble of leather seats and reserved parking and automatic donations that make you feel generous without ever having to sacrifice anything. The man in the white robe was watching me. What do you think your balance really shows, Marcus? Strip away all the justifications and excuses and rationalizations. What's the truth? I thought about my apartment. 5 bedrooms for one person. I thought about my car, a BMW I'd bought because I liked how people looked at it. I thought about my clothing budget, my wine collection, my country club membership I used maybe twice a month. I thought about Sunday mornings at Mercy Hill, sitting in my reserved seat, singing Amazing Grace, while people like Daniel were turned away at the door. I'm not a bad person, I whispered. No, the man agreed. You're just not a good one. Not yet. But you could be. My phone buzzed. A text from Pastor David. Where are you? I didn't answer. Another buzz. We need to talk. Now. And then, I'm coming to the shelter. Don't do anything stupid. I looked at the man. He's coming. I know. That sad smile again. He received the same invitation you did, but fear drives people to different choices. You came seeking answers. He's coming seeking control. What do you want from us? Not what you think. He gestured around the shelter at the sleeping people and the exhausted volunteers and the empty coffee urn that should have been full. I don't want your guilt, Marcus. I don't want your pity. I want your transformation. There's a difference. The green door banged open. Pastor David strode in like he owned the place, wearing his workout clothes, designer joggers and a Mercy Hill Church hoodie that probably cost $80. His eyes scanned the room until they locked on me. Marcus, outside, now. But the man in the white robe stepped between us. David Collins, senior pastor of Mercy Hill Church for 7 years, salary of $195,000 plus housing allowance and expense. Account, net worth approximately $2.3 million, author of 3 books about God's desire for your financial success. Pastor David's face went pale. Who the hell are you? Someone who checked your balance. The man pulled out his phone again. Would you like to see it? I don't know what kind of scam this is. It's not a scam. The man's voice cut through the shelter like a bell. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. It's a reckoning. You preach that wealth is evidence of God's favor, that poverty is a sign of spiritual weakness or lack of faith. You tell your congregation that they're blessed because they tithe, that their comfort is divine reward. That's what the Bible teaches, Pastor David said, but his voice shook. Is it? The man tilted his head. Because I remember something different. I remember a teaching about storing up treasures in heaven, about selling possessions to give to the poor, about how hard it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, about caring for the least of these. You're taking verses out of context. Am I? The phone screen lit up. Here's your balance, David. $43,000 spent last year on vacation to Bali, $28,000 on luxury watches, $15,000 on golf club membership, $7,000 on wine. And how much did Mercy Hill donate to homeless services, to food banks, to addiction recovery programs? Pastor David's jaw clenched. We have programs, we have outreach to other churches, to Christian conferences, to building your brand and expanding your audience. The man stepped closer. Your outreach budget last year was $380,000. You know where it went? $200,000 to televising your services, $100,000 to a Christian music festival sponsorship, $50,000 to leadership development for people already on your staff, $30,000 to mission trips where wealthy teenagers spent a week taking selfies in Guatemala. We're spreading the gospel. You're spreading yourself. The man's eyes blazed now. And when people like Daniel, like Maria, like Sarah, come to your church desperate for help, you turn them away because they don't dress right, because they might make your comfortable congregation uncomfortable, because they can't contribute financially to your vision. I'd never seen Pastor David speechless before. He stood there, mouth opening and closing, face flushing red. This is, Helen, what is this? He rounded on her. You put him up to this because you're bitter about something. That happened years ago? Something that happened? Helen's voice cracked. You destroyed my life, David. I made one mistake born of desperation, and you made sure I lost everything. Where was your mercy then? Where was your grace? Where was your Christianity? You stole from the bank. I borrowed $200 to keep my daughter alive, and I told Mr. Harrison I'd pay it back. But you convinced him to press charges because you wanted to make an example to show that your depositors were safe, that your bank was trustworthy. Tears streamed down her face now. You chose reputation over redemption, money over mercy, and you did it while quoting scripture. Pastor David turned to me. Marcus, don't listen to this. This is a setup. They're trying to manipulate us, to make us feel guilty for being successful. Show him your balance, the man in the white robe said to me. The real one, the one I showed you. I pulled out my phone, opened the image I'd photographed of. His screen held it up. Pastor David's eyes scanned the columns, the dates, the amounts, the purposes. I watched his face change as he read. Watched him see himself reflected in my spending, my priorities, my spiritual bankruptcy. This can't be right, he whispered. It's what God sees, the man said quietly. Every transaction, every choice, every moment you had the opportunity to show love and chose comfort instead, chose reputation, chose self. God doesn't. Pastor David stopped, started again. God wants us to prosper. He wants us to be blessed. Does he want you to prosper while others starve? Does he want you to be blessed while you turn away the broken? The man's voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. You teach about a God who rewards wealth, but ignore his clear commands about caring for the poor. You preach about a God who wants your success, but forget his warnings about loving money. You lead a church of thousands, but how many of them know how to actually follow Jesus? Pastor David sank into one of the folding chairs. He looked old suddenly, tired. What do you want from me? The same thing I want from Marcus, a choice. What choice? The man in the white robe looked around the shelter, at the sleeping families, the exhausted volunteers, the peeling paint and broken tiles, and industrial fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. You have resources, both of you. Money, influence, access. You could change lives. You could reflect the actual heart of God instead of a prosperity gospel that makes you comfortable and keeps everyone else at a distance. I can't just, Pastor David started. Can't or won't? The man's gaze was steady. Here's what I'm offering. A chance to check your real balance, to see what your life adds up to when measured by what actually matters, and then a choice to change the equation. And if we refuse, I found myself asking, then you go back to your lives, your luxury apartment, and your leather seats, and your automatic donations, and your reputation. You keep checking your bank balance and feeling successful while your spiritual balance drains to nothing. He paused. But you'll know. Every time you look at those numbers, you'll remember what they represent, what they cost, who they failed to help. The shelter door opened again. Daniel, the teenager who'd been kicked out by his father, stumbled in. His eye was swelling, his lip split and bleeding. Someone had jumped him. Someone always jumped them. Helen was there immediately with a first aid kit. "Oh, Daniel, again?" "It's fine," he muttered, but he was shaking. I watched Pastor David watch this scene, watched him see this boy he'd had removed from his church, now bleeding in a shelter, watched something crack in his carefully constructed facade. "How much does this place need?" Pastor David asked quietly. "To function properly." Helen looked up. "We need about $80,000 a year for basic operations, rent, utilities, food, medical supplies. We get about half that from grants and small donations. We make up the difference with volunteer hours and prayer." Pastor David pulled out his phone, opened his banking app. His hands were shaking. "David, what are you—" I started. "Shut up, Marcus." He typed in numbers, hit confirm, showed the screen to Helen. "I just transferred $40,000. That's half your yearly shortfall." Helen stared. "Pastor David, don't thank me." His voice was rough. "It's not enough. It's not even close to enough. But it's a start." The man in the white robe turned to me. "And you, Marcus?" My balance. My real balance. All those numbers that had felt like success, now exposed as selfishness. All those choices that had seemed justified, now revealed as failure. I thought about my apartment, 5 empty bedrooms. I thought about my car payment, my country club membership, my automatic donation that had never required actual sacrifice. Pulled out my phone, looked at that $47,329 in checking, the $223,147 in savings. "What would you do with it?" I asked Helen. "If you had more." She didn't hesitate. "Expand capacity. We could rent the building next door, double our beds, add a proper kitchen, hire a nurse, create a job training program, help people like Sarah find permanent housing instead of just cycling them through temporary shelter." I transferred $50,000. Then I looked at my savings and transferred another $150,000. $200,000 total, more money than I'd ever given away at once, more than I'd donated to anything in my entire life. Helen burst into tears. "It's not enough either," I said, throat tight. "But you're right, it's a start." Pastor David stood up, walked over to Daniel, who was still being patched up by Helen. "I'm sorry for turning you away, for making you feel unwelcome, for caring more about how you looked than who you were." Daniel stared at him. "You're the pastor from Mercy Hill." "I was," David said. "I'm not sure what I am anymore, but I'd like to do better, if you'll let me." The man in the white robe smiled. A real smile this time, warm and bright. "Now you're starting to understand." "Who are you?" I asked again. "Really?" He reached up and pulled back the hood of his white robe. His face was ordinary, kind, the face of 1,000 people you'd pass on the street without noticing. "Does it matter?" "Yes," Pastor David said firmly, "because if you're who I think you are, then what?" The man's eyes twinkled. "Would it change anything? Would it make your choice more meaningful if I said I was an angel, a prophet, God himself checking in on how his people treat the least among them?" He shook his head. "The choice is the same regardless. Love or comfort, sacrifice or security, transformation or stagnation." He moved toward the door, bare feet silent on the worn linoleum. "Your balances are still broken. One night of giving doesn't fix 12 years of taking, but it's a direction. Keep moving that way." "Wait," I called out. What do we do next?" He paused in the doorway. "You already know. You've always known. You just chose not to see." He gestured around the shelter. "They're everywhere, Marcus, on every corner, in every minimum wage job, behind every mask of poverty you've trained yourself to ignore. And every time you choose to see them, really see them, you check your real balance, the one that matters. Will we see you again?" Pastor David asked. "Do you want to?" "Yes, we both said at the same time. Then look, he smiled. I'm everywhere you refused to look before. He walked out into the night. The green door swung shut behind him. Helen was still staring at her phone, at the notifications of transfer confirmations. This is real. This is actually real. It's real, I said. And it's just the beginning. What neither of us knew was that the man in the white robe didn't leave alone. As he walked down 9th Street, his form seemed to shimmer in the streetlight. And for just a moment, just one impossible moment, anyone watching might have seen something extraordinary. Wings, faint but unmistakable, folded against his back beneath the white robe. Or perhaps it was just a trick of the light. The next morning, I sat in my penthouse apartment, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum, a monument to choices I was ashamed of. I called my real estate agent. I want to sell. The penthouse, Marcus, that property has appreciated $300,000 since you... I want to sell, I repeated. And I want to find something smaller, much smaller. Use the difference for something that matters. Pastor David called me 2 hours later. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. About what? About everything. His voice was different, raw. About what Mercy Hill has become, about what we need to change. And I'm going to need allies, Marcus. People who've seen what I've seen. I'm not on the board. You will be. I'm appointing you, along with Helen Morrison. Helen. David, she doesn't even attend Mercy Hill. Exactly. We need people who will tell us the truth, who won't let us hide behind our comfort anymore. He paused. This is going to get ugly. The board won't like it. The congregation won't like it. We're going to lose members, lose money, lose reputation. Good, I said. Maybe that's what we need to lose. The board meeting happened that Sunday after service. 7 members in expensive suits, sitting around a mahogany table in a conference room that overlooked the parking lot full of luxury cars. Pastor David stood at the head of the table. I want to propose a complete restructuring of our budget and priorities. What kind of restructuring? James Fisher, our treasurer, asked warily. I want to cut our building improvement fund by 80%. I want to reallocate our outreach budget to actual charity, homeless shelters, food, banks, addiction recovery. I want to remove the dress code. I want to train our volunteers to welcome everyone, not screen them for acceptability. The silence was deafening. David, Margaret Hanson finally said, that's financial suicide. Our donors give because they're proud of this church, because it's beautiful and successful and comfortable, I interrupted. They give because it makes them feel good without challenging them. All eyes turned to me. I wasn't supposed to speak. I was brand new to the board, barely appointed an hour ago. Marcus, with respect, you don't understand church dynamics, James started. I understand that we spent $30,000 on a coffee bar while the city mission shelter turned away families because they didn't have beds. I pulled out my phone, showed them the same spreadsheet the man in the white robe had shown me. I understand that my real balance, the one God sees, was spiritually bankrupt despite being materially wealthy. What is that? Margaret leaned forward, squinting at the screen. The truth about where our money goes and why, about what we prioritize and who we ignore. I looked at each of them. Friday night, I met a man who asked me to check my balance. And when I did, when I really looked at what my life added up to, I was ashamed. I told them everything. The shelter, Helen, Sarah and Daniel and Maria, the transfers I'd made, the conviction that had burned through my excuses. So you want us to follow your guilt trip? James's voice was cold. Make decisions based on one emotional encounter? No. Pastor David's voice cut through. I want us to make decisions based on what Jesus actually taught, not the prosperity gospel version we've built careers on. The real teaching. The one about caring for the least of these, about storing treasures in heaven, about how hard it is for the wealthy to enter God's kingdom. "We'll lose half the congregation," Margaret said. "Then we'll lose half." "The congregation?" David's jaw was set. "But we'll gain our souls." The vote was 4-4, a tie, which meant nothing changed. We walked out of that board meeting knowing the battle had just begun, but something else had begun too. Word spread about the transfers, about Pastor David's proposed changes, and while some members were outraged, others were curious. Sarah, the waitress from the shelter, showed up that Wednesday night. She stood in the lobby looking nervous, her 3 kids clinging to her legs. Security started to approach, ready to enforce the dress code. She was wearing jeans and a threadbare sweater, but Pastor David intercepted them. "Welcome," he said, kneeling down to the kids' level. "I'm so glad you're here." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Really?" Daniel came the following Sunday, then Maria, then others from the shelter, people who'd been turned away before, now cautiously testing whether the welcome was genuine, and every time they came, some of the old members left. Margaret Hanson transferred her membership to a mega church across town. James Fisher resigned from the board. Donations dropped by 30% in the first month. But other donations increased, smaller amounts, but more frequent. People who'd been sitting in the back rows, quietly uncomfortable with Mercy Hill's opulence, suddenly felt permission to care about different things. Helen started attending, sitting near the front with Daniel and Sarah. And every Sunday, I looked at them and remembered the man in the white robe, his question, his challenge. "What's your real balance?" 3 months later, I was working late at First Light Bank when the green door opened. I looked up, heart hammering, half expecting to see him again, but it was just a client, an elderly woman who needed help with her account. I stood up, smiled. "How can I help you?" She shuffled forward, and I noticed her shoes were worn almost through. Noticed the way she kept her purse clutched tight like someone might snatch it. Noticed things I'd trained myself not to see. "I need to make a withdrawal," she said nervously. "But I don't know how much is in there." "Let me check for you." I pulled up her account. $237.48. Her Social Security deposit had come through 3 days ago. By now, rent and utilities had eaten most of it. "How much do you need?" I asked gently. $180. For medicine. My prescription came in and I need to... She trailed off. "How much?" "Do I have?" I looked at the screen, looked at her worn shoes, thought about balances, real balances. "You have enough," I said. "I'll make the withdrawal." I processed it, handed her the cash, and as she turned to leave, I stopped her. "Wait, please." I pulled out my wallet, took out $200. "For groceries or whatever else you need." She stared at the money. "I can't." "Yes, you can. Please." Her hands shook as she took it. "God bless you." "He already has," I said. "I just didn't realize it." After she left, I sat at my desk and pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. Not to check my balance, I'd stopped obsessing over that number. Instead, I opened the notes where I'd started tracking something different. People helped this month. 17 money given to those in need, $8,400 time volunteered at shelter, 36 hours lives changed that I know of. 3A new kind of balance, one that actually meant something. My phone buzzed, a text from Pastor David. Board voted 6-2 to approve. The restructuring, we won. Relief flooded through me. That's incredible. How? 2 new board members, both from the shelter, both understand what really matters. Plus, James and Margaret's seats were filled by people who actually read the Gospels recently. I smiled, typed back, "Same God who fed 5,000 can sustain a church that cares about the right things. Amen." "Coffee tomorrow to discuss next steps?" "Absolutely." I set down the phone, looked out at the bank floor, at Jessica closing. A drawer, at Trevor doing his rounds, at the marble and glass and polish that had once seemed so important. It still mattered. My job still mattered. But now I understood what it was for. Not to accumulate wealth for its own sake, not to build a bigger balance that impressed no one but myself, but to have resources to share, to help, to reflect something bigger than my own success. The glass door opened one more time before closing. A man walked in, wearing a suit this time. Clean-shaven, confident, he approached my desk. "Can I help you?" I started to ask. He smiled, set down a cracked phone. "Just wanted to return this. I think you dropped it." I looked at the phone, looked at him. Recognition dawned slowly. "It's you, is it?" He tilted his head. "I look different than I did that night. You're not a beggar anymore." I never was. I was just checking balances. He gestured at my screen, at the notes where I'd been tracking my new priorities. "That's better. Still not perfect, but better." "Who are you?" I asked for the third time, knowing I still wouldn't get a real answer. Someone who believes in second chances, someone who knows that transformation is possible, even for people who've spent years getting it wrong. He picked up his phone. "Keep going, Marcus. Your real balance is improving. But remember, it's not about perfection, it's about direction." "Will I see you again?" Every time you look at someone you'd usually ignore, every time you choose compassion over comfort, every time you check what really matters instead of what merely accumulates. He turned toward the door. "I'm always there. You just have to look." He walked out. The glass door swung shut. And when I ran after him, looked out into the evening crowd on 5th Street, he was gone, disappeared into the city, into the faces of 1,000 people I was learning to actually see. 6 months after that night at the shelter, Mercy Hill Church looked different. The coffee bar had been removed, the space converted into a food pantry. The bookstore became a clothing distribution center. The reserved parking was eliminated. The dress code was gone. We'd lost 40% of our congregation, but we'd gained something far more valuable. People came now who'd never felt welcome before. Homeless individuals, addicts in recovery, single mothers, LGBTQ+ people who'd been rejected by other churches. The broken, the struggling, the ones Jesus actually spent time with. Sunday morning looked messy, diverse, uncomfortable for people who wanted polish, beautiful for people who wanted truth. Pastor David preached differently now, less about prosperity, more about sacrifice, less about blessings, more about service, less about what God would give you, more about what God was asking you to give. Some people hated it, but others, people like Helen and Daniel and Sarah, finally felt like they'd found a church that meant it. I'd sold my high penthouse, moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment, sold my BMW, bought a used Honda, cut my personal expenses by 60%, and the money I'd freed up, it went to the shelter, to the church's new outreach programs, to people like that elderly woman at the bank who just needed a little help to make it through the month. My bank balance was lower. My spiritual balance was finally growing. One Sunday morning, I was helping set up chairs when I saw her. A woman in a white dress, carrying a bag of donated clothes, talking with Helen. Something about her seemed familiar. I walked over. "Excuse me, do I know you?" She turned, smiled, and I saw it in her eyes. That same knowing look the man in the white robe had given me. "Do you?" she asked. Before I could answer, a teenager approached from the other side, not Daniel, someone new, wearing a volunteer shirt. He had that same look, that same presence. "How many are there?" I whispered. "How many what?" The woman's smile widened. "How many?" "Of you? Checking balances." She didn't answer, just handed me a stack of bulletins to distribute. "These go in the lobby. People will want to know what's happening here." I took them, watched her walk away, watched the teenager disappear into the crowd. Saw a dozen other faces I didn't quite recognize, people who seemed to appear whenever someone needed help, whenever grace needed to be demonstrated in practical ways. Maybe they were angels. Maybe they were just people who'd learned to show up. Maybe there was no difference. Pastor David found me standing there staring. "You okay?" "Yeah." I shook my head, just thinking about balances. Yours improving. I thought about the choices I'd made, the money I'd given, the time I'd spent, the people I'd learned to see. I think so. Still have a long way to go. Don't we all? He clapped my shoulder. But at least we're moving in the right direction. The service started. We sang songs about grace that I finally understood. Heard a message about loving your neighbor that I was actually trying to live out. Shared communion with people who looked nothing like me, who came from circumstances I'd never experienced, who needed a community that would accept them without requiring them to be someone different first. And as I looked around the room, at the messy, diverse, uncomfortable, beautiful gathering of broken people seeking healing, I understood what the man in the white robe had been trying to show me. This was the real balance, not numbers in an account, not accumulation of wealth or status or comfort, but accumulation of love, of service, of transformation. This was what actually mattered, what always had. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost deleted it, then saw the message. Well done, just 2 words, but they meant everything. I looked up, scanning the crowd for a white robe, a knowing smile, that presence that had changed everything. But I didn't see him, or her, or them, or whoever they were. I just saw people. Beautiful, broken, struggling, hopeful people, the least of these, the ones Jesus said would reveal his presence, and I finally understood. He wasn't hiding in some supernatural appearance. He was right here. In every face I'd learned to see, in every person I'd been taught to ignore, the man in the white robe hadn't shown me where God was. He'd shown me where God had always been, in the least, the last, the lost. In the balances I'd never thought to check. This story, while fictional, reflects a truth we all face. How easily we prioritize material wealth while neglecting spiritual richness. How quickly we judge others by their appearance while ignoring our own failures. And how comfortable churches can become when they cater to the wealthy instead of welcoming the broken. It was created not to deceive, but to make us reflect on the moments when we had resources to help and chose comfort instead. When was the last time you truly sacrificed something valuable to help someone who couldn't repay you? What stops you from giving generously to those in genuine need? Today, before you check your bank balance, check your real balance. Look at someone you'd normally walk past without seeing. The homeless person, the struggling single parent, the minimum wage worker. Offer help that costs you something real. You might not be entertaining angels, but you'll be practicing the grace that transforms both giver and receiver. Because the divine doesn't hide in prosperity, it reveals itself in compassion. This is a story from Hidden Grace Stories.